Have you read about what's happening to the mainstream media? Probably not. That's because there's no one left to write about it. Except maybe the AI. But it's probably too busy worrying about world domination. For the better part of a decade, the corporate media has been inching closer and closer to the edge of a cliff. Now they've started to Don Lemming themselves right over it. Hi everyone, it's Tim here from SpaceNetTV. The corporate mainstream media is in full-on meltdown. And to quote one of their own often overused phrases, that's a good thing. Let's talk about the end of corporate media, shall we? And as always, I promised I'll find a way to tie it back to Disney. Up until recently, I never experienced a massive disaster firsthand. That includes finding out where that fire truck was going when it came down my street last week. But last year alone, I was involved in the Hollywood writers' strike, the Screen Actors Guild strike, the summer movie season, and I was working for Disney. Technically, I'm in the SAG-AFTRA union, but it didn't go out on strike. There was just way too many douchebags outside the building to be associated with them. Big events tend to make great spectacles, and now I've got a front row seat to watch a massive event unfold. The demise of the corporate mainstream media, print, digital, and broadcast. The wolf is huffing and puffing at your house of straw, and it's going to knock it down. Personally, I believe corporate media is well past its peak. It's lost all right to call itself journalism quite some time ago. It was lost to corporate greed, government collusion, billionaire vanity takeovers, lax enforcement of laws allowing single entities controlling too much media, Orange Man bad, ESG, DEI, and let's not forget about the social justice activists that infest it. A seething host of cancers that have ravaged the body of journalism. Let's hear from one of their own. Recently, one of the worst examples of activist journalist, Taylor Lorenz, took to TikTok to complain about our industry collapsing.
The entire journalism industry is basically in a free fall.
Sorry to interrupt. She's not quite right. The industry is collapsing, but it's not in free fall. Gravity, much like it was with the Hollywood Tower of Terror, was not fast enough. So we had to motorize it. The mainstream media is not in free fall. It's in full-powered descent and headed straight for the ground. Now back to Taylor.
Today, the Los Angeles Times laid off 115 employees. They wiped out their entire DC bureau in an election year. They laid off pretty much all of their sports teams. They killed their entire tech and business section. They laid off breaking news writers, social media editors. The list goes on. But what's really dark is this is just the latest in months and months and months of layoffs in the media industry. In fact, tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in the past year.
She seems so oblivious as to why the industry is failing and to her part in its demise. Certainly she's not solely responsible, but she does represent many of the worst qualities of the mainstream media's new breed of journalists. Journalists. Yeah, we'll call them journalists. The new style of journalism supports narrative over facts, pandering to a specific, narrow audience, biased reporting, and attacking anyone who disagrees with you. Sloppy research, if you've done any at all, and being more interested in what people are going to say on Twitter than reporting what's actually happening. So she goes on to speak about several large media companies that have either recently shuttered entirely or laid off large numbers of their staff. I did a video not long ago about one such demise, Sports Illustrated. SI had actually orchestrated their own collapse by their own ineptitude, their own poor editorial policy, and their desire to chase the modern audience and wokeism, and it led to them shutting down.
Today, the Los Angeles Times laid off 115 employees. They wiped out their entire DC bureau in an election year. They laid off pretty much all of their sports teams. They killed their entire tech and business section. They laid off breaking news writers, social media editors. The list goes on. But what's really dark is this is just the latest in months and months and months of layoffs in the media industry. In fact, tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in the past year. Major media companies like BuzzFeed News have completely shuttered their news operations. Time magazine also just laid off a ton of people, and Sports Illustrated basically shut down last week. Pretty much the entire digital media ecosystem that myself and a lot of other millennial journalists came up in has been completely hollowed out. And it's not just digital media sites. Local news has been obliterated. The newspaper industry is cratering. Radio is essentially dead aside from NPR, which has been gutted.
NPR? If that's all that's left on broadcast radio, we can probably just close that down right now. Reassign those frequencies to drone control or contacting the aliens or some other better use.
Meanwhile, hundreds of workers at Condé Nast, the parent company of pretty much every major magazine from GQ to Vogue to The New Yorker to Vanity Fair, are on strike because they're also facing impending layoffs. Even mainstream national media outlets owned by billionaires like The Washington Post, where I work, and The Atlantic, where I used to work, have done layoffs.
Eventually, even billionaires running vanity properties to control political spin or influence the economy or talk smack about their rivals aren't going to continue to fund a sinking ship forever. But the important thing she did mention was a reference to mass media corporate conglomerate Condé Nast. Have you heard of them? Most people haven't. Condé Nast is a 100-year-old-ish corporate media conglomerate headquartered in New York City, the poop capital of the East Coast. What media publications does Condé Nast own? Traveler, Architectural Digest, Bon Appetit, Glamour, GQ, The New Yorker.
All you'll have for entertainment is that giant stack of New Yorker magazines.
Oh, come on. You and I both know I'll never read those.
Of course you won't. But they'll just keep coming.
Vanity Fair, Vogue, and Wired, to name a few. Do you suppose these publications operate independently, or are they all following the same corporate messaging? Corporate media is everywhere. Comcast owns NBC Universal, which includes NBC, Telemundo, USA Network, Sci-Fi, Universal Pictures, and more. The Walt Disney Company owns ABC, ESPN, FX, Freeform, and a lot more worldwide. AT&T, they own Warner Media, which includes HBO, CNN, and Warner Brothers. Viacom, this conglomerate owns Paramount Pictures, CBS, MTV, Nickelodeon, and Comedy Central. News Corp owns Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Post, The Times, and The Sun in the UK, and a bunch of local newspapers and magazines. So you see a handful of large conglomerates own a vast majority of the media worldwide. They shill for them. They control what gets reported on and what doesn't, and how it's reported on. Meanwhile, they're all beholden to massive investment firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and a few others. They take a heavy hand in setting and enforcing policy at these companies.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors.
Forcing behaviors. Who elected these clowns to enforce any kind of behaviors or what they perceive to be good or bad? Certainly when we all gave them our pension funds, which is where most of their money comes from, municipal and private pensions. That we weren't expecting that the company we gave these to manage our investments was going to use it to become Dr. Evil, who was going to use it to try to control society and bend it to what they think it ought to be. Personally, I don't think any fund should be allowed to get to the size of BlackRock or Vanguard. There should be a cap on it so that no one company can do exactly what these clowns are trying to do. What you have with corporate media, then, is it leads to things just like this.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these things simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is what corporate media brings you: control of the narrative, control of the story, and control of you. All the trusted local news people who we once thought worked for our communities and were the most trustworthy because they were local to us. We probably see them around town, but they've turned out to be just corporate shills too. Through their editorial policies, their blatant and obvious bias pushing of ideology, mostly far left ideology, but don't think that Fox News is somehow immune to it either. Journalists on all levels, whether they're happily complicit or just carrying out a corporate objective to keep a job, they have lost the faith of the American people. Trump called them fake news. First, he was mocked for it. Then he was demonized for saying it. Then he was proven right. Russia showed us that. Hunter Biden's laptop cover-up reinforced it. And government collusion to spread false COOF information topped it all off. The fake news moniker stuck. It stuck because they earned it. It stuck because it was true, and perhaps even worse than we thought. Maybe it's just the legacy media that's really in trouble because of its old, outdated business models, all of the talking heads in suits reading from teleprompters. Surely online media is okay. It's hip, young, tapped into Gen Z. News reports have been telling us for months now that it's digital and social media that's to blame for the legacy media's failures. Nope. Digital media is in no better shape. Vox Media recently laid off 7% of their staff. This includes their outlets like Verge, Thrillist, New York Magazine, SB Nation, Vulture, Now This, all part of Vox Media, and all have been affected by the layoffs. Rumor has it that some or maybe even all of these could be sold, shut down, or consolidated. BuzzFeed, once valued at $1.7 billion, is shutting down. Worthless. Vice Media laid off 10% of their workforce. Vice runs Vice.com, Vice Studios, Vice TV, and Vice News. They're part Canadian. I hear that's a country, which explains the high level of creativity in naming their organizations. Yahoo News organization laid off 1,600 employees, gutting their operation. Who knew Yahoo still had 1,600 employees total? It's like digital dominoes. One goes, then another, and before you know it, they've all been knocked down. And that's exactly what's happening. Taylor's parting words came with a warning.
Not even why a lot of them are going out of business. A lot of them are going out of business fundamentally because the economics of the media ecosystem are broken. Most news companies used to monetize by advertising, and those ad dollars have been completely subsumed by Facebook and Google and tech giants. I don't really know where that leads us other than a pretty dire place where there's really no check on corporate and political power in this country. I did write a lot about this in my book called Extremely Online, but I do think that journalism is something a lot of people won't realize they miss until it's gone.
She is not wrong. However, we've all been suffering for some time without any real journalists or news outlets. The world does indeed need free journalists, a free news media, and an unbiased news media that aren't pandering to a subset of the population to create an audience it can package for advertising. Rather, we need them to be reporting facts to us all. An unbiased, factual, investigative free press is absolutely necessary, not to our democracy, but to our republic. Democracy means you're only pandering to to enough people to get a majority. A republic requires you to speak truth to everyone. Right, left, liberal, conservative, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But virtually all of the corporate mainstream media do not exhibit any of these traits. They do shoddy work that's barely Twitter-worthy as long as it fills time between pharma commercials. They create clickbait articles not to inform, but often just to enrage for views. They're clearly biased, mostly leaning left, and some just outright Marxist completely. Their activism shows in how they craft their editorial policies and reporting. Know what they'll cover and what they'll ignore. Rarely does any news story come without commentary attached. It didn't used to be like that. They reported facts and let you make your own opinions, not to try to help you form them. If the latest pew 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 event isn't a right-wing white guy involved, it's not newsworthy to them. But everything the alphabet mafia do or think definitely is. And in a very highly regarded status at that. I still hear reporting parroting Democrat talking points about how great the economy is doing. This while their own industry is burning down around them. In 2023, nearly 23,000 media jobs were cut. Just within the last month, the Los Angeles Times announced layoffs of up to 20% of its newsroom employees. Time magazine said it will terminate 15%. Sports Illustrated, that I mentioned before, they're gone. Business Insider will cut 8% of its staff, and Forbes another 3%. I think that's like the third layoff they've had. Yeah, I think it's the third layoff they've had in very recent time. Does anybody even read Forbes anymore? It's been mostly trash since it was bought up by a Hong Kong investment group. What was their name? Integrated Whale Media. Okay. I sure hope that sounds better in Mandarin. Condé Nast, publisher of Vanity Fair, Vogue, GQ, Bon Appetit, and others, is on the verge of massive layoffs and shutdown. Naturally, in protest over the pending layoffs, workers decided to go on strike.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to celebrate anyone losing their job. Despite the collective actions of modern-day journalists and their corporate media bosses and the damage I think they have done to our society, on a personal level, losing your job is devastating, especially in an industry where finding another job may well be extremely difficult. But this is what you get when you forget what your job was supposed to be. Instead, you focused on causes, ideology, pandering to small segments, and the social justice crisis of the day. Over simply reporting the who, what, when, where, and why in an unbiased fashion that was taught to you on day one of journalism school. Or at least it was. Who knows what the hell they're teaching now. The public has grown tired. Tired of the bias, tired of the lies, tired of the DEI and the ESG. In short, they're tired of you. The American public tends to express itself with its wallet, or in this case, with its eyeballs. The marketplace always wins out. As the readers and viewers have left you, so has the advertising dollars. It's not the changing tech landscape. It's not the digital takeover. It's not a lazy public who wants their news in 30-second TikToks delivered by some of the most annoying people on the planet. No, they're just tired of you. You brought this on yourselves, and now you're falling apart faster than a Democrat-run city. So as I promised, how does this all tie into Disney? A good part of what Disney does is media. They're a media company. It has news divisions in ABC and ESPN, and news like commentary in its talk shows like The View or that dumbass Jimmy Kimmel. I still don't understand how Disney keeps this guy around. Disney loses money with every single episode we aired. And yet, they renewed his contract. It's inexplicable. 20 writers on that show, and they still can't write a funny monologue. Speaking of unfunny, the catering budget on this show doesn't help the bottom line any either. ESPN has gone all in on wokeness and BLM. Even when we could easily see it was hurting the brand, they wouldn't back off of it. ESPN was a massive cash cow for Disney. Massive. But now, while still profitable, And you can't say that about much of Disney these days. Its brand was hurt and continues to suffer. Viewership is on the decline in all of these properties, plagued by the same self-inflicted issues as the other corporate media entities. Don't forget, it was Disney's ABC who did this.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton, we had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
ABC was once the crown jewel for Disney. After all, if Iger hadn't sucked as an ABC weatherman, he'd never be in a position to destroy Disney right now. Just another area where Disney's organizations have gone woke and are now going broke. Enough so that Iger recently floated the idea of selling off ABC altogether. But who would want it? Getting the smell out of Kimmel's dressing room alone would cost millions. I was once told that if ABC was sold, that I would likely go with it. Why? I have no idea. Maybe Kimmel needed one more unfunny writer. Anyway, that's what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I really enjoy reading them, and I try to respond to as many as I can. That's all I have for now. I'll be back real soon with another video. Until then, you take care. Bye for now.
The entire journalism industry is basically in a free fall. Today, the Los Angeles Times laid off 115 employees. They wiped out their entire DC bureau in an election year. They laid off pretty much all of their sports teams. They killed their entire tech and business section. They laid off breaking news writers, social media editors. The list goes on. But what's really dark is this is just the latest in months and months and months of layoffs in the media industry. In fact, tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in the past year. Major media companies like BuzzFeed News have completely shuttered their news operations. Time magazine also just laid off a ton of people, and Sports Illustrated basically shut down last week. Pretty much the entire digital media ecosystem that myself and a lot of other millennial journalists came up in has been completely hollowed out. And it's not just digital media sites. Local news has been obliterated. The newspaper industry is cratering. Radio is essentially dead aside from NPR, which has been gutted. Meanwhile, hundreds of workers at Condé Nast, the parent company of pretty much every major magazine from GQ to Vogue to The New Yorker to Vanity Fair, are on strike because they're also facing impending layoffs. Even mainstream national media outlets owned by billionaires like The Washington Post, where I work, and The Atlantic, where I used to work, have done layoffs. If you're a young journalist today, there's almost no on-ramp to traditional journalism. Even if you do get a job, journalists' salaries have been stagnant and even declined. And by the way, we don't make that much to begin with. I don't think people understand how bad the world would be without journalists. And let me just preface this by saying, for people that don't know my background, I did not go to journalism school. I built my own audience on the internet. I came from outside journalism and started as a blogger, and then entered into legacy journalism, a system that I have been incredibly critical of pretty much my entire career. So I'm definitely not some mainstream media defender. And I think the rise of citizen journalism on apps like TikTok, Instagram, and elsewhere has overwhelmingly been a positive thing. The journalism industry is overrun with elite, underqualified, rich, entitled Nepo babies, okay? And that part of it is terrible. But that's not most journalists. And the majority of journalists losing their jobs in situations like this are the working journalists that are doing these investigations of police brutality, or investigating corporations, or holding power to account, or doing really thoughtful, brilliant cultural commentary. I don't want to live in a world where all of the news is delivered through 60-second TikTok videos with retention editing. And I think there's a ton of really talented journalists that are also just not great, like, social media people. I think of some of my friends who are journalists who do really deep investigations or local reporting or sit through hour-long city council meetings to, hold some local politician to account. That's really important work, and it's work that somebody should pay for, and it's work that's not rewarded by these social media algorithms. I would love if everyone could become independent journalists, but the economics are just not there. It's really, really hard to amass a subscriber base and then retain that subscriber base over time when you're doing investigative work. And that's if you don't get sued out of existence, by the way, after you publish the first critical story of a billionaire. And I will admit, a lot of these traditional media companies have accelerated their own demise. They ignored the internet for years. They're condescending to content creators and people outside their mainstream ecosystem. They constantly kowtow to corporate and political power. They have these false and deluded notions of objectivity, which, by the way, doesn't exist. And they push a lot of really racist, sexist, regressive crap. But that's not even why a lot of them are going out of business. A lot of them are going out of business fundamentally because the economics of the media ecosystem are broken. Most news companies used to monetize by advertising, and those ad dollars have been completely subsumed by Facebook and Google and tech giants. I don't really know where that leads us other than a pretty dire place where there's really no check on corporate and political power in this country. I did write a lot about this in my book called Extremely Online, but I do think that journalism is something a lot of people won't realize they miss until it's gone.